There was no laughter when Rachel Maddow introduced the segment. Her voice was calm, clipped. Tonight's guest is Karoline Leavitt, a former Trump White House staffer, now the national press secretary for a presidential campaign that's reshaping the Republican Party. She requested this conversation. I accepted. No music rolled, no cue for applause. Rachel looked straight into the camera. We're not doing this for performance. We're doing this to see what survives the questions. The camera cut. Karoline Leavitt walked onto the set. She wore navy, no pattern, no accessories, just present styled clean, composed, and clearly media trained. She didn't wave to the studio. She didn't smile at the crew. She shook Rachel's hand. Not firm, not cold, just intentional. They sat. The table between them didn't feel like furniture. It felt like tension flattened into hardwood. Rachel spoke first. Karoline, thank you for being here. Karoline replied. Thank you for having the courage to put someone across from you who won't fold. Rachel blinked once, then said, I don't invite people to fold. I invite them to finish a sentence they don't control. Karoline tilted her chin. Not arrogant, just steady. Then let's finish it. Rachel reached for her first card. You've said the media is the greatest threat to national trust, and yet you're here on a show watched by millions. What do you want those people to hear from you? Karoline didn't pause. That I don't believe in silencing the audience, even when the platform wants to curate what they hear. Rachel replied. You think this show curates the truth? Karoline said. I think this show packages outrage and calls it journalism. Rachel didn't move. She simply asked, and what would you call it? Karoline leaned forward slightly. A performance wrapped in vocabulary designed to make the opposition look theatrical. Rachel set the card down. And what are you doing right now? Karoline answered, surviving a room that was waiting for me to crack. There was no laughter, no tension break, just two women absolutely fluent in pressure and neither one blinking. Rachel Maddow placed her hands flat on the desk. No notes in them, just the silences she intended to fill. She asked, You've accused the media of dividing the country, but you've spent your career defending people who've profited from that division. What's the difference between strategy and damage? Karoline Leavitt sat upright, unmoved. She said, The difference is whether you tell the truth and let the public decide, or whether you wrap the truth in your own fear and call that reporting. Rachel replied, Fear isn't what lives here. Facts do, Karoline countered. Then why does this room only feel safe when the person across from you already agrees? The audience was quiet again, not shocked, just suspended. Rachel leaned. Karoline Leavitt in? No, the line should be, Karoline Leavitt doesn't fit. Likely a typo in the original. We should fix, Karoline Leavitt. Let me correct, Karoline answered. I'm here to stand in the space no one thought I belonged, and to leave without shrinking. Rachel said, That sounds rehearsed. Karoline said, So does every question designed to make me sound like a headline before I finish the sentence. Behind the cameras, a floor manager mouthed clock toward the control booth. The booth didn't respond. Everyone was watching. No one was blinking. Rachel shifted slightly, but not back. She moved forward. Let's talk about democracy. You've defended election denial. You've stood next to candidates who question the system while running to benefit from it. What do you call that? Karoline replied. I call that refusing to accept the system that only welcomes our voices when we lose. Rachel asked, Do you believe in facts? Karoline answered, I believe in the right to speak before facts are packaged by people who already chose a side. Rachel nodded. Then she asked, And when you're wrong? Karoline said, I don't correct truth for comfort. The silence was full now. No one in the room thought this would go off the rails, but no one expected it to stay this steady either. And somehow that made it more dangerous because both women were landing punches without ever raising a voice. Rachel Maddow reached for her notes, then stopped. She didn't need them anymore, not because she was off script, but because there was no script left to follow. She looked across the table at Karoline Leavitt and asked, What are you actually afraid of? Karoline didn't flinch. She answered plainly, That people won't listen to what I say, just to what they were told I represent. Rachel asked, And what do you represent? Karoline said, Conviction, the kind that doesn't require applause to hold shape. Rachel sat back slightly, studying her. Karoline's voice hadn't cracked. Her pace hadn't changed. She was speaking like someone who had been called names in more rooms than she'd been welcomed, and had decided she'd rather be heard than invited back. Rachel pressed. But don't you think your message has caused harm? Real harm. Karoline nodded. I think the country's hurt, and I think both sides want someone else to carry all the blame. Rachel followed. So, what's your part of it? Karoline's reply was quieter now, but still sharp. I stopped correcting the way people misunderstood me. I let the version of me they hated do the talking, because I didn't trust they'd hear the real one anyway. The audience didn't react. They weren't sure they were supposed to. Rachel asked, And do you want to be heard now? Karoline replied, No. I want to leave knowing I didn't lie to soften the landing. There was no camera cue, no cut to commercial, just two people finally speaking the kind of truth that only emerges when both sides drop the act and the distance. Rachel looked down, then said, You're not what I expected. Karoline responded, Neither are you. Rachel asked, What did you expect? Karoline said, Someone who needed me to crack so she could say this segment worked. Rachel replied, What do you think happened instead? Karoline answered, You listened, and I didn't flinch. The red light above the camera was still on, but no one remembered anymore because the tension wasn't in the performance. It was in what hadn't been reduced. Rachel Maddow looked at Karoline Leavitt and asked, Do you believe I want this country to fall apart? Karoline said, No, I believe you think you're saving it. I just think you're saving the version that already pushed people like me outside the frame. Rachel nodded once, then asked, And do you think I see you clearly? Karoline answered, Clearer than most, but not without the filter. Rachel said, And yours? Karoline replied, It's built from the rooms that only ever let me in so they could say they did. No one moved. The control booth didn't whisper. The producers stopped watching the clock because this wasn't going long. It was going honest, and that made time irrelevant. Rachel leaned in slightly, not to push, but to close the distance between them. She said, I've spent years asking questions like scalpels, but I think tonight I forgot what it feels like when the person across from me doesn't bleed. Karoline looked at her. That's because I stopped showing you where the wounds were. Rachel didn't look away. Why? Karoline's voice dropped, not with softness, but with weight. Because in rooms like this, you learn that pain gets packaged faster than truth. The audience didn't clap. No one told them to. Not that it mattered. This wasn't applause. This was the recognition of two women no longer trying to trap or escape each other, just trying to finish the sentence, whatever it revealed. Rachel asked finally, What do you want from a space like this? Karoline said, To leave with my whole self intact and not be turned into a headline I wouldn't recognize if I read it tomorrow. Rachel nodded. And if you are, Karoline said, then it was never an interview. It was an edit. The red light above the camera finally went dark. The conversation was over, but no one moved. The audience stayed in their seats. The crew stayed behind their lenses. Even Rachel Maddow stayed exactly where she was, elbows on the desk, gaze steady across from a chair that still held Karoline Leavitt's shape. Even after Karoline stood, Karoline didn't ask to stay. She didn't linger. She stood slowly, pushed her chair back without scraping it, and walked off the set without looking back. No wave, no smile, no exit line, just a silence that followed her. Not because she took something with her, but because she refused to leave anything behind. Backstage, a producer approached Rachel. Do we need a statement? Rachel shook her head. No spin. Not for this. The producer nodded, then asked, Do you want to air it? Rachel was quiet. Then she said, Only if we leave the silence intact. That night, the full segment ran. No cuts, no music beds, no commentary after. Just two women speaking like neither one needed to be redeemed. And for once, the comments weren't about who won. They were about who refused to play. The next morning, Karoline Leavitt's phone buzzed with messages. Some from people congratulating her for holding her ground. Others accusing her of walking into the lion's den and not roaring. She didn't reply to either. Instead, she sent a single message to a team member who had warned her not to go on the show. She wrote, I didn't need to be right. I needed to stay whole. I did. Rachel Maddow sat in her office that same morning. She rewatched the final 2 minutes, paused on the moment Karoline turned away, and wrote one sentence on a notepad. She didn't change the narrative, but she refused to become it. 3 weeks later, Rachel Maddow gave a talk at a private media symposium. She wasn't scheduled to speak about Karoline Leavitt, but during Q&A, someone asked, What makes an interview unforgettable? Rachel paused, then said, When someone shows up with nothing to prove, nothing to sell, and nothing they're willing to lose just to be liked. She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew which segment hadn't ended. Even when the lights went off, Karoline Leavitt never mentioned the interview again. But in a closed-door prep session with a candidate weeks later, someone asked her, "How do we get through without folding?" Karoline replied, "By not mistaking disagreement for danger, and by not speaking like you're afraid to be misquoted." She didn't bring up the show, but she wore the shape of it, the clarity it demanded, the restraint it required, and the calm it forced her to claim. Viewers still re-watch the interview in pieces, not for drama or sound bites, but for the stillness, for what wasn't said, for the look in Rachel's eyes when she realized Karoline wouldn't break, and for the moment Karoline realized she didn't have to. No one was kicked off. No one won. But the room remembered, because not all clashes are fire. Some are refusal, and the ones that last the longest are the ones no one can turn into content.